Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming today on a Thursday afternoon. Super hot outside to learn about fatigue. Fatigue is one of my favorite topics. The the condition, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, what's called myalgic encephalitis now, is one of the main reasons. Was one of the big reasons I got into this type of medicine, to try and figure out how people's bodies worked, what was going on there. And fatigue is a symptom of so many conditions, and it can be due to so many different things. So today is not a chronic fatigue syndrome sort of talk, but if you're here because of that, a lot of the same principles apply. We're going to go into more of the mundane, sort of everyday things that drive fatigue in most of us. So I'm going to keep this handy. I'm going to be managing a few screens here, so I can make this a little bit smaller there. Please feel free to pop any questions in the chat box that you might be having, either related to this topic or that you want to be asking at the end of the talk. I'll try not to talk too much past about a half hour, and then it will be completely open floor for any questions about anything, which is always fun. So let me hold on. Make sure I have the chat box handy. And feel free if you have a question just to unmute yourself. I think everyone is muted now. And with no further ado, let's go. So why am I tired? Let me count the ways. Fatigue is just one of the most common symptoms that we encounter in the clinic here, and I think most places. It's sort of an epidemic of modern times. Most people are dealing with fatigue at least some part of the time or some part of their life. And we're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to try to identify two different types of fatigue. There's adaptive fatigue, which serves a purpose. And then there's pathological fatigue that isn't responding to normal things that we do to recover from fatigue. But it's important, and in functional medicine, we like to remind us that symptoms are often messengers. So fatigue can be adaptive. It's our body telling us it needs to rest. It needs more time for healing and recovery. And we'll talk about that a little bit, because actually giving yourself rest, your body's amazing. It will recover, it will repair things. So some examples of adaptive fatigue are what's called sickness behavior. We'll talk about that if you're not getting enough sleep, or after draining things like physical, mental, or emotional activities. And with adaptive fatigue, when you rest, you'll recover from it, and you may actually come back more strong and more resilient after you've rested and recovered and made the adaptations to respond to that stressor. So pathological fatigue is more long-term. It can involve central fatigue, motor neuron fatigue. It's not resolved by reasonable amounts of rest and recovery. And we'll go into some of the things that can mediate that. A lot of neuroendocrine immunology, which, if you have come to any of my talks, is a common subject that we talk about as leading to a lot of our symptoms. So let's begin. And most of the topics we're about to go over apply both to adaptive fatigue and pathological fatigue. So here's a summary of reasons why people are tired. If you can think of anything else, please put it in the chat box. I'll address it. This is the categories I thought that took care of most of the different things. We'll talk about sleep, inflammation, the nervous system, hormones, and decompensation and stagnation. So to start with, sleep. Here's a quote from a sleep scientist and writer, Matthew Walker. "The biggest bridge between hope and despair is a good night's sleep." A lot of us know that, getting enough sleep can make a huge difference in how we feel, how we think, how we perform, how we feel about the world. So why do we sleep? And I was actually listening to some podcasts and reading up on this, make sure I had my story straight for this. We used to think that sleep was a little quiet death. There's kind of poetry about that term, quiet death of sleep. We thought that basically we go into hibernation, nothing goes on. But our bodies and our brains are actually extremely busy when we sleep. We do a lot. We clear waste from our brain that accumulates from all the activity. Our brain immune system is remodeling and repairing and cleaning up the brain. We form new neural pathways. We process and store information. The hippocampus is a major part of the brain that is involved in memory storage. If we don't sleep, we can't process it and put it in the right places. Muscle repair, as most of you might know, if you're exercising or moving and you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be a lot more sore. Your body is cleaning up and repairing your muscles when you sleep. Hormone secretion is a big one. Of course, we're doing all kinds of hormone secretion at every moment of our day. But at night, we do certain specific hormone secretion. For example, athletes should know that one of the most important ways to boost growth hormone is through sleeping. So sleeping after an intense workout will boost growth hormone and actually help you repair and recover and adapt and come back stronger and better from that exercise. Cellular repletion and also cleaning up cellular metabolic processes that have happened during our busy day. And then metabolism, which is a big topic. We're talking both about metabolism, like a lot of people think of, where we're thinking about how many calories do I burn. So we are doing, caloric sort of energy expenditure, metabolic cleanup, but we're also talking about cellular biochemical cleanup as well. So sleep is a very, very busy state. If we aren't getting enough sleep, a lot of things can go wrong. To be honest, I kind of tell this funny story that having studied chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, autoimmune stuff, inflammation, depression, anxiety for a long time in physiology research and on my own, when I started treating in the first year or two, I was very excited, and it took me a year or two to find out. People would come in and tell me they were tired, they were exhausted, I have chronic fatigue. It took me a year or two to realize that a lot of people just weren't sleeping enough. They'd want their, hormones checked, inflammation, all of these things, and I'd find out they're sleeping, 5, maybe 6 hours a night. Maybe it's 7 hours, but it's broken up, interrupted. So yeah, you're going to be tired if you're not getting enough or enough quality of sleep, and you're going to deal with fatigue, mood changes, decreased cognitive ability and memory. Certainly your physical performance will decrease. Some studies in athletes show that getting an extra hour of sleep can increase your performance by only a few percent, but the difference of that percent improvement and increase is the difference between like the gold medal and nobody, that, person 10, 20 places back. You'll have increased hunger and cravings and decreased impulse control. So if you're dealing with hunger, cravings, food addiction, make sure that we want to make sure that your sleep is solid so that you can have a better chance of getting that neurochemistry under control. Certainly suppressed immune function, increased inflammation. We'll get into that a little bit more in the inflammation section. And then in America, the CDC has basically declared a sleep epidemic. And along with our food sources and inactivity, considers lack of sleep one of the major drivers behind the surge in obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So let's talk about how much sleep do you need? It can be helpful. You can see this little chart, and a lot of us have sleep tracking devices that we can use to help check in on our sleep. I kind of don't take people's words for it when they say they sleep fine. A lot of people think 6 hours, 6.5 hours with a couple interruptions is fine because maybe they've been getting away with it. So biologically, 7 to 9 hours a night is normal for the human species, and this is for adults. Teenagers are more like 9. People under teenage years are actually closer to 10 hours of sleep. So if you have kids and they're on their devices and they're not getting, at least 9 hours of sleep, and they're dealing with ADD, ADHD, anxiety, better check their sleep and get that tightened up. Good luck getting kids off devices, but that's the short recommendation. In sum, if you're using a sleep tracking device, you don't have to use it forever every single night, but you might get some data, a few days or a week at a time to check in on if the things that you're doing to help your sleep are working. What you want to see is at least 90 minutes of deep sleep, 90 minutes to 2 hours. And you usually see that at the beginning of the night. You can see this kind of first bigger trough of deep sleep. You want to see that you're not waking a ton. You don't want to know that you're waking a ton, and you don't want to see a ton of waking events, which you might be able to see on some of your apps that connect to your watches for sleep tracking. Also remember that 7 is the bare minimum amount of sleep. So if you are tired, if you're sleep deprived, if you're already hormone dysregulated, stressed out, dealing with inflammation or diseases, 7 might not be enough. 8, 9 might be your actual bare minimum, and the quality of it is important as well. And then when do we need to sleep? So certain housekeeping happens in our brain and our body. And from the vast majority of the human population, that does happen between about 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., or actually 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. is when a lot of that house cleaning happens. So even if you are getting 8 hours of sleep and maybe you are getting consistent 8 hours of sleep, but it's 12:30 a.m., you're actually going to miss that first, what is that, hour and a half, 2.5 hours of house cleaning that isn't going to happen at any other time, even if you are getting the recommended amount of sleep. And just think about it. Again, if you hear me talk at all, you'll hear me say this a lot. Remember that modern life is extremely modern. We didn't have the ability to stay up late. We had to go to bed when it was dark. So it makes sense that we have this circadian entrainment, that certain housekeeping happens at certain times, that our brain and body only do that housekeeping at certain times. We didn't have access to light after we went to sleep, and most of us probably had to get up early or were forced to get up early by the rising sun. So try to get your body entrained to that. When I'm dealing with people who are fatigued and chronically fatigued, number one, how much, what's the quality of your sleep? Two, entrain it to normal biological times. That being said, there are very few percent of people in the population who are born night owls. I would always question people who think they are, because most of us have had modern light screens, televisions most of our life, and are probably trained that way. The joke I make is, to find it, if you're truly a night owl, go live in a cabin with no electricity for a year. Come back and let me know if you're a night owl. So yeah, sleep's very important. Okay, next we're going to talk about the term inflammation. And we're going to talk about fatigue as a symptom of inflammation, and as a call to, like, a messenger to help us identify that we need to heal and rest, as well as a symptom of more chronic, debilitating, maladaptive types of inflammation. So there's a term in research in physiology called sickness behavior. And so fatigue is a very normal and can be an adaptive response to inflammation. A really good example of that is when you get a cold or a flu and you feel way more fatigued. That's your body's trying to get you to stop, sleep, and allow all of your resources to go to fight that infection, that invasion. And so in holistic and natural medicine, when we're doing natural treatment for cold flu, we really want you to go sleep, bundle up, let your body use all its resources to fight that infection. So yeah, inflammation is actually the immune system's response to a potential or harmful stimuli, either real or perceived. And inflammation is actually part of the healing process, the response to save us and to get us back to where we need to be, balanced and not being invaded. That being said, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Excuse me, actually, inflammations, that being said, inflammation does have a lot of effects on our different parts of our body. So it certainly affects our nervous system, both our brain, command central, as well as our peripheral nervous system. Using the example of a cold or flu, again, you'll probably have brain fog. If you're feeling sick, you might feel weak physically. Your body's kind of trying to slow everything down, and that inflammation clouds your brain. Chronically, inflammation can dysregulate the brain. Inflammation either in the body that affects the brain or actual inflammation in the brain can cause neurotransmitter and neurosignaling dysregulations that affect mood and cause anxiety and depression. Inflammation can affect cell metabolism, especially if it's long-term. Probably less, it's not that important in an acute case like a cold or a flu, because your body will recover from that. But chronic long-term inflammation, it creates a lot more metabolic load. Your cells are a lot busier dealing with that inflammation. Overworked cells that can't do what they would normally do because of the inflammation. You're not going to keep up with your normal biological processes, and you're going to get fatigue from that. And then hormone dysregulation is a side effect of chronic or long-term inflammation or very severe inflammation. We'll talk about that a bit more under the hormone section. And then back to sleep, inflammation affects sleep, and then lack of sleep can perpetuate or dysregulate inflammation and immune responses. It goes both ways. So of course, when we're inflamed, it can increase sleepiness and fatigue, but also inflammation can impair our sleep patterns. I do use one of these devices to track, and a month or two ago, when I was going to bed and I was kind of in denial that I was getting the flu, that's all the flus that have been going around. And when I woke up in the morning, I checked my sleep data. My heart rate was 14 beats higher than its normal sleep resting rate, and my respirations were I can't remember, it was like 4 or 5 more respirations per minute. So that inflammation, my body's immune system going after that pathogen, definitely affected my sleep. Yeah, so again, vice versa, lack of sleep is associated with increased inflammation, and inflammation can cause fatigue as an adaptive response. It can interrupt healthy sleep architecture, and it can affect the brain and make it harder for us to sleep. Okay, let's talk about everyone's favorite subject, hormones. Excuse me. A lot of people who are feeling fatigued, they want to focus on their thyroid, their sex hormones, fix my hormones, what's going on with my hormones. A lot of the time, hormones are actually the collateral damage from all these other things that we're discussing. You'll have lower sex hormones, you'll have cortisol imbalances from long-term sleep deprivation, stressors, inflammation. And then, of course, that hormone dysregulation will affect your energy and make you more tired. But we can't truly correct the hormones unless we correct the underlying causes of that, the inflammation, the sleep stuff, the lifestyle imbalances, all of that. So hormones are both cause and effect of fatigue. So hormones, or the endocrine system, just in brief, do a lot of things. They are involved in the stress response. We'll talk about that a little bit. Of course, reproduction, regulation of our menstrual cycle, of androgen and sperm production in men, of everybody's libido, mood, metabolism, growth. They affect the brain and influence mood and sleep and circadian patterns. I kind of put that specifically in there. People think, especially women, we deal with a lot of mood disturbances, different points in our menstrual cycle, often either around the hormone spike of ovulation or the week before our period, when we're going from very high progesterone and estrogen, and that's dropping down to trigger the start of the period. So I always like to point out that absolutely that's tied to your hormones, but mood is our brain. It is not our hormones. It's our hormones' effect on our brain that creates those mood changes. So a lot of the time, if you are having mood or inflammation related changes at those points in your menstrual cycle or triggered by hormonal stimuli, maybe taking birth control or something like that, just remember that it can also be due to something going on more central command your nervous system. So we certainly want to check for hormone stuff like too high estrogen, too high cortisol, too low cortisol. But we want to make sure we're checking. Actually, let me correct that. So with the estrogen being too high or too low, like estrogen dominance, people often want that checked when they are dealing with fatigue and issues and menstrual irregularities. And sometimes that can be normal, but it's the hormones' effect on the nervous system. Not to belabor that point. Hopefully that made sense. Let me know if not in the chat. So let's talk about the stress response. This is, a lot of people know the word cortisol. There's a lot of press and marketing around supplements and cortisol. So a stress response is any response to any perceived or real threat. So that could be an injury or inflammation. That could be someone being mean to you. That could mean you thinking someone might in the future be mean to you. That will trigger a stress response. So that's what we mean by real and perceived. And we'll get to that more when we talk about the nervous system, about working on that perceived part. But also know that the body has these recovery mechanisms to heal from the stress response. It should be stress response, resolution, recovery, adaptation. However, if we're chronically stressed, either real or perceived, it's too repeated, too frequent, too often, or too severe, or any combination of those things. That will mean that we don't get to that recovery phase, we don't get to that adaptation phase, and eventually we will decompensate and not be able to recover our energy, get back to balance. We will suffer fatigue, probably sleep issues, maybe other hormonal issues, increased inflammation. So a dysregulated stress response from chronic or too severe stressors can be a major reason for having fatigue. So yeah, some of the causes of hormone dysregulation, that chronic stress. We often think about mental emotional. Sleep deprivation is a chronic stress. Chronic illness, chronic inflammation is a chronic stress. Nutrient insufficiency, that may or may not mean calorie insufficiency, can be a chronic stress and cause fatigue, as well as calorie insufficiency and actually calorie excess. Severe as well and or acute trauma or illness. And then age changes. And let's take a moment to talk about testosterone, estrogens, progesterones. So on the one hand, age changes in hormones are to be expected. I always like to point out that menopause and andropause, the kind of a male equivalent of menopause, are not diseases. Anyone blessed to get older will experience decreases in their hormones. And so, in my opinion, I want to think about how to optimize the transition to our later years, which may or may not mean trying to get hormone levels back to pre-menopause, pre-andropause levels. And then also a lot of the changes that we experience with menopause, fatigue, sleep changes, mood changes. Again, that's central nervous system mediated. It's the hormones effect on those, on the nervous system that creates those. So we want to make sure that while we're looking at optimizing aging and age-appropriate levels of hormones and mediating any negative symptoms of menopause, like hot flashes, sleep changes, mood changes, that we're also considering the whole picture. Kind of annoyingly, I say that menopause, andropause is when all of the stuff that maybe we thought we were getting away with most of our life might come to roost. It could also be your inherited predispositions start showing up as our hormones change and signal towards that next phase of life, that next phase of aging. So on the one hand, decrease in sex hormones can and testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone can be a major cause of fatigue. We also, without necessarily wanting to put people on tons of hormones for decades of the rest of their life, want to make sure we're supporting the nervous system, sleep, nutrient sufficiency, all those other things in order to make sure people have proper energy. 1 second, I think I saw a chat pop up. Seasonal allergies. Yeah, seasonal allergies absolutely could be considered a chronic stress. So there's two things about seasonal allergies. On the one hand, allergies right here in your face by your brain. It's right by your brain. That inflammation, that blood-brain barrier, it's real thin right there. And so a very, very common symptom of allergies, especially more intense ones, is actually fatigue and brain fatigue, even more so than other health issues, because it's right there in your brain. And yeah, anything that requires an inflammatory response. And in allergies case, it is your immune system going after having an inflammatory response to what should be a completely tolerated innocuous substance. So that absolutely could lead to dysregulated hormones and fatigue, but also just acutely having inflammation near your brain will cause fatigue. Oh, who can't sleep between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. because they work overnight? Great question. Let's take a moment there. So I pretend I'm a robot and not a compassionate human being. There's a lot of significant risk associations with shift work and overnight work, and there really isn't any known way to compensate for that. I mean, certainly doing, if possible, as much to have a regular sleep cycle outside of that shift work, getting sufficient sleep, maybe using your sleep tracker to make sure you're getting at least 90 minutes of deep sleep. But yeah, we don't know that you can completely compensate from that. But if you love it, and of course we absolutely need shift workers. I mean, I'm mainly thinking of people in the medical profession, but so many other things that we take for granted that run because people are up working all night. Yeah, I think the main things would be circadian entrainment. If you're not going to entrain to that 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or something in that sleep cycle, make sure that you do have, hopefully your job allows you to have some other circadian entrainment so you're not jumping all over the place. Make sure you're getting light exposure to stimulate a ton of stuff in your brain. That's sunlight. Really, we are plants. We are controlled, and chemicals and neurohormones are secreted in response to natural sunlight. Make sure you're getting exercise, and of course, doing all the other things to mitigate inflammation and support your health, like nutrition, mindfulness, stress reduction, those sorts of things. So those are really good questions. Yeah. So anything else there? I'll go back to where we're talking about kind of aging and fatigue related to hormone dysregulation. Let me go over here 1 second. So the other thing I didn't talk about as much is the cortisol response to stress. Cortisol is secreted at basal amounts as part of our circadian pattern. We have to have it for life. In response to stress, cortisol, adrenaline, a bunch of neurotransmitters are all secreted in response to the stress response. And we'll talk about this as we get to the nervous system, because stress is a coordinated, let me see, did I go back here? Nervous system, hormone, and immune system response. Then the long-term perpetuation of the stress response is what can lead to fatigue. It's that decompensation of not being able to maintain that. So I feel like I kind of jumped around there a little bit. Let me know if you have any questions about that. But that does lead us into talking about the nervous system. The nervous system is tricky because you can't test it. You know, if you are a rat, we could slice your brain up and stain it for proteins or stick cannulas in there and read electricity and all these kinds of things. But so when we're talking about the nervous system in humans, we kind of have to go based on symptoms. You can't test neurotransmitters in the brain. That's a, don't let anybody tell you can. That's a blood-brain barrier. You can test neurotransmitters from the neck down. But the nervous system is command central. So when we're talking about fatigue, whether it's from sleep, inflammation, the nervous system or hormones are kind of the two biggest drivers of determining whether or not we feel like we have energy. The nervous system, importantly, consists of the brain, the peripheral nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system. Together with the hormone system, it coordinates the stress response, sleep, and energy availability, both perceived and physiologic. And we'll talk about perceived energy more in the next section. But most people, when they're feeling fatigue, it is either from hormone dysregulations or nervous system dysregulations. And a lot of that is coming from lifestyle stuff, sleep stuff, inflammation. One of the important topics with the nervous system is that most of us are in go mode all of the time. And I like to point out the brain, the central nervous system, is much like our body. We wouldn't expect our bodies to be able to do hard workouts all day, every day. We'd probably expect to feel pretty tired from that. But most people expect our nervous systems to be on all day, every day. Whether we're doing something, we're thinking about something, we're futurizing, we're, rehashing the past. Nervous system constantly being on is, I find, actually a really under-identified and really main cause of a lot of people's fatigue. So yeah, let's talk about that. So right now in the moment, and I'm talking, so I'm a bit more on the pink side over here as I'm presenting in front of a group, but where is your nervous system? Just as you're sitting here right now, can you take a deep breath? Do you feel relaxed? Are you in the parasympathetic rest and restore? Or are you in the sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze? Most of us, whether we're grocery shopping, folding the laundry, in a work meeting, dealing with our children, are on the pink side of things. And this is a major cause of hormone dysregulation, sleep dysregulation, immune dysregulation, that can lead to fatigue. So one of the main things that you can do to work on this, outside of course, major stressors and major inflammation driving your fatigue, is to close your tabs. It's a metaphor, computers, I have a lot of tabs open on my computers. So someone once told me this a long time ago, your brain, you don't need it for everything. We think we do. Our brain likes us to think we do. You need your brain for certain problem solving things, but you don't really need it most of the time, or a lot of the time outside of maybe work or other tasks like that. So don't use your brain when you don't need it. The same way as maybe you don't want to exercise all day. Close some tabs. You're driving. What are you thinking about? Are you thinking about driving? Are you thinking about right here in the moment? You're thinking about the future. You're thinking about the past. Give your brain some quiet time. Quiet and silence is sort of a endangered thing right now. How much time of silence do you actually have? And if you do have some downtime and some silence, is your brain trying to fill that up? So if you're burnout, if you're fatigued, if you're having sleep issues, during the daytime, getting your nervous system to close its tabs and learning to both tolerate silence and then get more silence in your life can be extremely restorative. So here's a few things you can do towards that. One of them is what I was taught to be called life practice. So whatever you're doing, it could be usually kind of mundane tasks that obviously don't require the brain, not your bookkeeping. Whether it's folding laundry or yard work or crafts, something like that. You practice being completely present and breathing and relaxed with that task. So if it's laundry, you are focused on the laundry, treat it almost like yoga. Breath centered, slow it down, fold your laundry. You're with the towel, you're with the t-shirt. The same with the dishes. You're not mad at your partner who isn't doing the dishes. You're with the dishes. Using your breath to relax and center. Be completely with whatever you're doing. Close your tabs, just be in the now. Certainly meditation is extremely helpful. A lot of us, it's a hard crux to get over, to get us to just sit there. If you're going to think about doing some meditation, I'd recommend just starting with a small amount so that you kind of don't have the excuse to not do it, like maybe 3 minutes. Certainly you can use guided meditations. And then the other thing is, if you meditate for 45 minutes a day, but the rest of the day you are ba 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 ba, it'll be a little less impactful. So remember that life practice part. Be with what you're doing when you're doing it. And one example of that is, I'll skip down to the bottom one. I like to call it a stoplight meditation. So maybe you're not going to have time to set aside time for meditation. Maybe you did a little life practice today, but now you're also driving to work, you're driving to get the kids, whatever. We all have stoplights when we're driving. Turn off all the sound. Maybe turn off the sound before you get to the stoplight. And whether your hands are on the wheel or on your lap, take some breaths, shut your mind off. You can use your breath or specific things that you see in your present moment as ways to ground yourself in the present. Allow yourself to be truly in silence for that really brief amount of time at the stoplight. And then do it at the next stoplight. Maybe you carry that quiet between stoplights. Maybe you go back to thinking. Maybe you go back to music or podcast or whatever it is. But driving is actually really advanced. It's like uses a lot of unconscious brain stuff. But on the other hand, like you can use it as life practice, and you can use those little stoplights as little meditations. So turning off the nervous system, making sure we get good sleep. We'll talk about addressing inflammation and hormone imbalances briefly in a moment. Those are all major drivers of fatigue. But other things that can cause fatigue are not true fatigue. It's decompensation and stagnation. So let's talk about that. So one thing to check with yourself is, are you fatigued or are you detrained? Our bodies, our human bodies, even when we're young, but especially as we get older, are extremely efficient. They will not keep up what we do not use. So if we're used to not getting much movement, our bodies aren't going to maintain the cellular metabolism, the musculature, the nerve stimulation to the muscles, the chemistry and blood flow to our brain. And we're going to feel tired just because we're not using anything in our bodies very efficient, not keeping up those systems. So fatigue can actually be due to decompensation, to lack of stimulation to our metabolism, our nervous system, our hormone systems, and our muscular systems. So for those of us who are or have dealt with chronic illness, it can be important to overcome this identity a little bit of being chronically ill in order to help you recover. When we're chronically ill, when we're in pain, when we're feeling exhausted from inflammation, from immune processes, from illness, we have no choice. We have to rest. We have to respect that. Forcing ourselves to move or do things can make us feel much, much worse. That being said, as we're recovering from being ill, we actually need to push ourselves a little bit in order to retrain our nervous system, our hormones, our muscles to be able to do activity again. And there's no perfect way of knowing what's the right amount. You do your best. Maybe you work with a physical therapist. And it's okay, sometimes you'll you'll overdo it and you'll be extra fatigued and it'll take a little bit longer to recover. The way I kind of talk about this is being ill and is a lot like being a professional athlete. You have to train yourself just the right amount and recover as much as possible from that in order to adapt and get back stronger. If you're of normal health, you have a bit more wiggle room. But if you're dealing with a chronic illness, you still want to stimulate, whether that's breath work that you're doing while sitting in a chair, Tai Chi, standing or sitting, yoga, gentle walks, a little bit of strength training, whatever is appropriate. If you're here, you want to push yourself here and you want to let recover, then that your body adapts. So that little bit of training can be really important to maintaining your health and getting some energy back. Second, I saw. How can you tell the difference between detraining and something like chronic myalgic encephalitis and chronic fatigue syndrome? Recovering from multiple rounds of COVID this year and understanding is that pushing through CFS can actually make it worse. Yeah, and the thing is that both are true. Pushing too hard can set you back, but that's kind of where I'm talking about. Pushing can mean sitting in your chair and doing breath work with mindfulness. We're circulating our breath. We're still stimulating our cells. It might not mean strength training. So it's very individualized to kind of where you are. As far as recovering from multiple rounds of COVID, there's a couple things without digressing too much there. Number one, COVID allowed us to first kind of understand that, not first, there's a lot of people in functional medicine in the Lyme world and other worlds who kind of understood that infections can cause chronic symptoms. It may mean that the infection is still there, causing problems. It may not mean that the infection is still active, but it's caused rippling effects through your immune system, your nervous system, and probably eventually your hormones that lead to things like fatigue and brain fog and weakness. So recovery from that is about supporting cells. It's about supporting the immune system and probably just that right amount of circulation and stimulation, which again can mean sitting up in your chair and doing breath-centered, focus-centered, gentle movement. Just kind of whatever you can tolerate within that level. Old school chronic fatigue syndrome, conventional thought was all they did was send you to boot camp and force you to work out, which is total nonsense. But there is a tiny sliver of truth to that. Like we need to, and this is what I try to do in functional medicine, what we try to do in functional medicine, identify like inflammation, nervous system dysregulation, hormone dysregulation, cellular dysregulation. We need to identify and do our best to address what's causing the fatigue from those long-term chronic immune dysregulation, either stimulated by an infection or not. But then on top of that, you aren't going to recover, as we're addressing all of those things, you aren't going to recover unless you are stimulating a little bit at the appropriate amount. So there's some truth in both. We need to identify what's keeping you fatigued after chronic infections or whatever else, and do our best to identify to treat them, which I don't think we perfected in 2024, but we have some good stuff. And then as we're addressing those things and hopefully eliminating them, then you're going to need to re-stimulate your system. So, yeah, we can talk some more about that in a little bit too. More in a common everyday situation, a lot of us are stagnant. I meant to put in, I didn't add, but TED Talks Radio Hour actually has a great series called The Body Electric. If you want to look at it, it goes into a lot of the science around this. So a lot of us feel fatigue, for example, at the end of our workday or end of a stressful event because we're stagnant, for lack of a better word. One of the scientists talks about in The Body Electric that so sitting at your desk like this, there are nerves that come out of our spine that innervate adrenaline to come out of our adrenal glands, a different part of our adrenal glands that cortisol comes out of. And we're like this at a desk all day. Guess what? That doesn't happen. And we feel tired, we feel brain dead, we might feel depressed, anxious, fatigued. And so the solution, they had actually just a bunch of people do it and report back, was they had people get up every hour. And it's different than a standing desk. Standing desk certainly gets you from sitting, but what was actually really key was getting your heart rate up. Even if it was just 5 minutes of marching in place or jumping jacks or some push-ups, going for a brisk walk, getting things moving stimulates all the neurochemistry, the body chemistry to keep us alert to create adaptation so we're not decompensation, to give us the hormones and the wake up chemicals we need to feel alive. So for example, how do you tell the difference between stagnation and fatigue? Okay, maybe on the weekend you went and shopped all day and went for a hike and did 3 other things. Are you as tired? Are you tired after that? Or versus a work day where actually you got very little physical activity. Maybe you sat all day, but you're exhausted. That's not depletion fatigue or dysregulation fatigue from hormones and the nervous system inflammation. That's stagnation. And so the solution to that is more exercise, more movement. And then the tricky part is you really want to be doing it interspersed throughout your day. And again, calling back to anthropology, desk jobs are extremely new to human biology. Most of us had to labor all day long. We probably had more depression and anxiety, but we had more neurochemical stimulation and less ability to deal with probably all of our anxiety and trauma. So I think a lot of the fatigue that we're experiencing in modern life is honestly from a lot of stagnation and decompensation as well. So yeah, kind of some tips are, if you are inspired by any of this, it's to start where you are physically, not where you want to be. Maybe you know that you can walk an hour a day and take some breaks every single day to do some jumping jacks to get the heart rate moving, or go for a brisk walk. Depending on like what kind of personality you are, just start where you are with a little step. Behavioral change science, as well as just physical adaptations. You can get there eventually, but don't overdo it to start with. How are you going to do it? Set reminders. I mean, again, our human biology wanted us to be extremely lazy. That's how we kept the weight on and kept safe. So a lot of us are programmed for inertia, to want to not move. Get accountability partners. Set reminders on your phone. Set things that you cannot not get away with. I heard one thing when I was looking into some of this stuff. This person wrote a really big check to a group that they really don't like, and they framed it in front of their bed. And so when their alarm went off every morning in the early morning, because they had a friend that if they didn't continue to train and meet this fitness goal, their friend, I think they gave the check to their friend. So if they didn't continue to get up and train to get to this fitness goal, their friend was going to send the check to this group that they really didn't like. So, I mean, it's a little bit of funny and maybe negative reinforcement, but it worked for this person, and it forced them to establish a habit that they now keep. So whatever you need to do to create that motivation to do it, do not depend on waking up at 5:30 and your prefrontal cortex reminding your lower brain centers that it wants to do this. Set something bigger than that. Really importantly is get some fresh air and some natural light. Get that central brain, the central control of the brain, and train to natural light, fresh air. That can help with stagnation. Again, it stimulates a lot of neurochemistry in our brain. One of the things that can help with sleep entrainment and wake cycles entrainment and fatigue is getting outside first thing in the morning. It doesn't even have to be exercise. Just go in your yard and get some fresh light on your face. And when you're tired at work, 5 minutes outside. I mean, it's pretty hot right now, but it'll wake you up. Get moving, get some fresh air. So when you're tired throughout the day, unless you are truly ill, sleep deprived, get some movement, get some fresh air. And then it's not particularly topic weight goals, but a lot of people are fatigued or are dealing with weight stuff and vice versa. But I also just really encourage, rather than weight goals, fitness goals. So if you're going to get up and start moving throughout your day to break stagnation, get your sleep entrained appropriately, set some fitness goals along with that, but not weight goals. How long can you do a certain type of exercise? Can you train to walk a 5K? Most people who are physically fit have way better energy throughout the day. So that's that decompensation part. Fitness is a means to toning your hormones, your nervous system. It usually improves sleep. The body is just well-oiled and works better and has less fatigue when it's working on fitness. And then, of course, around the nervous system and closing your tabs, less screen time, more better. When in doubt, less screen time. So yeah. Those are some main things from the nervous system. And then this is just kind of a summary of energy and where we get our energy from. It's a combination of the nervous system talking to the immune system through neurotransmitters. Here you see, that's actually backwards. Neurotransmitters here should be backwards. Neurotransmitters go to the hormone system and the immune system. Cytokines, inflammation signaling goes to the brain and the hormones, and then hormone signaling, oh, we got this all mixed up. Hormone signaling from the endocrine system goes to the immune system and the nervous system. And all of this determines both your perceived and your real amounts of energy. And so these are all the kind of areas we want to think about to recover your energy. So yeah, make sure your sleep is on track, close some tabs, get moving, retrain from decompensation and overcome stagnation. And then, this is a huge topic on the bottom, but so identifying and treating inflammation, hormonal imbalances, nutrient and cellular insufficiencies, and healing the causes and the collateral damage from fatigue, which is the bulk of what we do here in functional medicine. So hopefully that gave you some ideas about understanding of maybe what fatigue reasons you're dealing with and some things to do about it, both sort of the everyday sort of fatigue that we see, as well as, the more pathological chronic fatigue. So I'm just going to open the floor up. Let me see, how are we doing? Yeah, we got 11 whole minutes. If anybody has any other questions, throw them out. Excuse me. And I can just ramble in the meantime too. Let me think. I probably could talk forever about the chronic fatigue, myalgic encephalitis, COVID sort of situation. On the one, so the picture that fits into is chronic stress from immune dysregulation, cellular dysregulation, which the infection can have. COVID is a virus. A lot of viruses live in our bodies indefinitely. It's not really well understood, COVID, herpes simplex viruses, Epstein-Barr virus, chickenpox, varicella, zoster viruses. All these viruses are living in our body all the time. If you're someone who's dealing with long-term COVID from one or multiple rounds of COVID, a lot of the time we want to think about whether or not there could have been pre-existing dysregulation too. Was there already chronic stress or trauma dysregulating your nervous and immune system? Was there gut microbiome things going on? Was your diet inflammatory? Were you getting enough sleep? Were there other infections going on? So part of healing from things like chronic fatigue, whether it was due to COVID or anything else, is thinking about all of the things that could be contributing to it. And then peeling back the layers and addressing all the different areas. How does sleeping on your stomach impact things? That's an interesting question. Can you be more specific? What I could ramble on that, but what are you specifically thinking? As far as maybe sleeping on your stomach causing poorer sleep? I mean, mainly it would be like, is it causing neck pain or that's keeping you from sleeping? I find a lot of people like pressure. Let me see, vagus nerve, muscularly, quality of sleep. Okay, well, that's kind of where I was going with it. A lot of people sleep better with some pressure, especially on the kind of like softer or sensitive sides of their body. That could be sleeping on your stomach. That could be a weighted blanket. That could be swaddling, making sure you're pretty packed in with your blankets and having a really cold room so that you can do that. A lot of us can sleep better when we have that sort of comfort. That can actually really improve our body's ability, our nervous system's ability to relax. So if sleeping on your stomach is more relaxing to you, as long as it isn't causing any neck pain, absolutely. If it's causing neck or body pain, then I'd think about some alternatives. If sleeping on your stomach is very calming to your nervous system, and that could be weighted blankets. That could be keeping your room really cold and sleeping with a lot of blankets and pillows on top of you. Yeah, but I think that's somewhat individual. So yeah, but interesting question. Yeah, that this kind of a lot of people with maybe chronic stress, chronic trauma, heightened nervous systems, the soft sides of our body in Chinese medicine, the yin sides of our body, like the front of us, the inside of our thighs, the inside of our arms, are more, it can go both ways. either very defensively, you kind of don't want anybody near it, and that can create a lot of anxiety, and then vice versa. Having a lot of pressure there can be extremely calming for the nervous system. So, having some tummy time, doing some swaddling, doing some weighted blankets can be good for sleep, sleep quality. So interesting question. Yeah, I'll be hanging out if there's anything else there. Any other questions? And it can be related to other things outside of fatigue or sleep or anything. Yeah, I hope the person who does the shift work and is up overnight, if you have any other questions about shift work and fatigue, some people thrive on it. Some people love it and feel fine and feel good. Research still shows some risks with being a shift worker. If you don't thrive being on shift work, especially if it's shift work that keeps changing, that can be pretty tricky. As much as we need those people, and I don't want to negate how much that is needed. I mean, honestly, I probably wouldn't be able to fix the cause of your fatigue. It's like we want to do root cause treatment in functional medicine, and being on shift work, especially rotating shift work, is really tricky to overcome if you aren't adapting to it. Yeah. So yeah, I think one thing probably with fatigue people might have been more interested in, I'm thinking about as I went through it, like cortisol imbalances. I think cortisol and thyroid get most of the attention for fatigue. And as I mentioned with hormones, it's often collateral damage. So for thyroid, if you have Hashimoto's, an autoimmune attack on your thyroid, you might not even have too low thyroid yet. Eventually, that autoimmune attack will degrade your thyroid's ability to produce enough thyroid hormone. And if you have Hashimoto's autoimmune hypothyroid, you may or may not have any other ramifications of inflammation or autoimmunity throughout your body. That could just be the one area. But in general, you may have other areas of inflammation and dysregulation. Of course, in functional medicine, we want to clean up the gut first thing with thyroid, make sure you have nutrient support, but then also think of hormones as a whole. The thyroid and adrenal glands, adrenal cortisol production, have a really tight relationship. Cortisol hormone affects thyroid activation hormone, a little less of the other way relationship. Yeah, and the other one, people are really, really interested in cortisol. But again, if your cortisol is dysregulated, something got you there. We do really in-depth adrenal cortisol testing. It can be really, really important. But supplements and herbs aren't going to fix that if the underlying drivers are what got you there. If we don't address the underlying drivers like stress, poor sleep or sleep dysregulation or not quality sleep, inflammation, nutrient stuff, lack of exercise. Yeah. So cortisol is really, really popular and absolutely is a huge cause of fatigue issues, but it's collateral damage. We gotta fix the reasons why maybe your cortisol is dysregulated. So yeah, I'll hang out and run my mouth for a couple more minutes if anybody has any specific questions. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah, feel free to email or send any other questions. We'll send the this out in the newsletter no later than next week, I think. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday, and hope it was useful. There's a lot to do for fatigue, so no need to suffer too much. And if it's more than sleep and lifestyle stuff and working on your nervous system, then we can help. So thanks, everyone.